Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So, it's interesting. Yesterday or today is Super Bowl Sunday. And I remember back in the Gap where that was a big cultural phenomenon. And I didn't even bother looking at the Super Bowl except for the scores a couple times because I saw people posting who won on certain pools. I think it's hilarious that pools are still kind of illegal, but they still happen. Free men don't ask permission. But what was really interesting to me was I've had a couple people this weekend from way back in the Gap that started hitting me up about my podcast, asking what it was, where it was, how do they get to it. And what I realized then was, like I've always said, New Mexico's different. My culture is different. My people are different. And I think it's reflective in how we grew up. You know, I grew up in, I guess you'd say a clique, but it was a neighborhood clique. You know, we played G.I. Joes together when we were younger. Later on, we graduated to full contact football without pads because, well, we were kids. And another game that, I won't finish it because my distribution channels will freak out and give me a strike, so I won't finish that. But it was a real game. And we all had different abilities. Some of us were faster. Some of us were just turned out to be tanks. The first time I remember playing football with these guys, I was passive. But I played and I did okay. The next time I went out, I got chosen for a team right away. And we proceeded to realize I was a pretty decent tank with some other people. And we played, mind you, we're like 9 or 10 when this is all going down, playing the game. But it reminds me very much about the culture we grew up in. You know, back then we may have had some sort of beef with the other kid for a minute because that's what kids do. But what's funny about it is that beef ended very quickly. And either we fought and got over it, or our dad made us go out and square it away, and we did it like gentlemen. But we did it as men. And that's a piece of society I wish we could get back to. You know, when I say the 2A's for everybody, it reminds me very much what we'd learned back then. You know, we would have threatened somebody because we had access to guns. That wasn't weird. But it was kind of an honor code that if you did do something like that, you'd get your ass kicked multiple times, in addition to not just your parents, but your friends. It's just something you didn't do. And that's missing in today's society. A lot of times people talk a lot of smack, myself included, not expecting to get smacked in the mouth, and sometimes we deserve a smack in the mouth. Now, I can admit that I've gotten my ass kicked more than once for opening my mouth when I shouldn't have, but a lesson learned, I think. But that culture, that's something that is ingrained in New Mexico. There are different types of New Mexicans. In Northwest New Mexico, we will always represent the 505, but we don't kind of get along with the bigger cities. We like being rural for a reason. Our values are more reflective of being rural. There are gangster types in New Mexico, but they kind of deal with their own things, and if they're really into the gang culture, they hang out and do bad stuff. I can say in the group I hung out with, we may have all ended up being exposed to alcohol, drugs, stuff like that. But we never, it never got past anything. I lost a few friends that couldn't silence the demons in their own head. But they were great individuals. Some of them served their country. As my friends grew up, we all split off in different directions. And how does this all relate to the 2A? Is because I think we were all in the 2A back then. I don't know a single friend of mine that didn't have access to firearms or didn't go shooting. It was kind of a neighborhood thing. It's funny that back then I remember us having like these stupid rivalries between neighborhoods. Then you get into like middle school and find out those rivalries, those people are probably your best friends. I never understood some of the rivalry, especially in the 2A, because it all means that we're all in the same place. It's really reflective lately where you see I support the 2A, but really, there's no but. This is your right. And having grown up in, an middle class family, I wouldn't say we were upper middle class by any means. We worked hard to get where we were at, that is. And I worked hard to get where I was at before I left the district. I'm celebrating a little bit this weekend. I am completely out from government control except for licensing for my business. And taxes, of course. That's a big deal. Having worked for a K-12 for 12 years and 7 years before working for a higher ed that was basically just K-12 plus, is the best way I could put it, because they're all state entities. As we look at what's going on in the Roundhouse in New Mexico, and we're seeing that same thing reflected in places like Arizona, and we're seeing it reflected in the actual national capital, where they're going hot and heavy after guns. What I can tell you about what's going on in the Roundhouse, this weekend has been very eventful. They've listened to the bill that would be constitutional carry. It's kind of in limbo, I think. There have been a lot of things that they were looking at House Bill 50, but it was deemed that that would get rolled into House Bill 101. This is how the sausage gets made. House Bill 50 was the bill that will ban magazines larger than 9 rounds. I think that's going to get tabled or is gone completely now, as they're going after anything with 10 rounds or more with House Bill 101. And House Bill 101 is banning any so-called assault weapon or any semi-automatic with a detachable magazine. I don't think any of these are worth a damn. And I've sent emails already and I've called already because I've advocated for that for you to do it, and I won't advocate for something unless I'm willing to do it. So I called and I emailed. I haven't been able to get down there because technically I've been out of work for over 60 days right now. Funds were a little tight until I got my payout. And it's still tight because that's got to last me as I start my new business. When I launch the new business, I'll probably launch a corresponding podcast just dedicated to that, to kind of document for myself where I came from and where I'm going when I start that business. My daughter should be the lead of the business because on paper I don't want to be anything but grunt work and finance to be able to fund things. I have a lot of intellectual property involved, meaning business plans, that type of stuff. But I have every bit of confidence where I'm going that this is probably the right decision. I also realized how burned out I was in the job I was at and how much I want to break into the 2A community because that's where I belong. And my friends that I was speaking about earlier, they'd probably tell you it would make sense to put Sean in one of those places where I was an industry guy for the 2A. If you look at the culture war aspects of what's going on, there's a lot of people that were pissed off about Rihanna performing, saying it sucked. Lady was pregnant. Again, don't care. It was a sports ball game. I gave up watching football as much as I loved it. I even played football for a long time after that because I was inspired by playing on the field with those guys. And it's hard to give it up, or it was, up until you saw Ray Lewis slap the hell out of his, and it was, I know it was a Raven. I'm pretty sure it was Ray Lewis slap the hell out of one of his girlfriends, fiancés, or wives or something. And at that point, I was realizing that we don't do that. My friends back in the Gap, I think we would have kicked people's ass, and I know we kicked people's asses for messing with girls. Like, you don't do that. As far as trans and gays and everything else, I don't remember that ever being an issue. And what I mean by that is people were accepted to play in the game, but they had to know the risk of playing in the games, you know? And we played full contact. There was times that one of us probably got knocked out. We didn't realize it till later, but it was fun. And as we grew up, we got jobs and we split off to different places and became young men and men, grown men now. I look back and I see what have we done with our with our kids, for our families. It seems to me, Matt, like in mass, that Generation X, my generation, has checked out because there's not very many of us, and the boomers always overshadowed us. And now it's our time. The boomers are aging into retirement, and Gen X is probably the most skilled workforce there is, because we always thought we had to be better than everybody else anyway for a lot of reasons. Problem is, there's not enough of us. But what's funny about that is that cultural decay. I remember the Super Bowl specifically, us arranging a game to happen right after the Super Bowl dropped. And nowadays, I don't see kids outside as much. Maybe that's a problem. I wasn't allowed to go home, and I think a lot of my friends weren't either. We were told to go outside play, and we did for a long time. And we did it in rain, sleet, or snow. And we did things like shoot lizards with BB guns and birds and stuff like that. We played Cowboys and Indians or G.I. Joe, like the real action with like toy guns. I don't understand a lot of the stuff, the disappointment. We each had our little thing. I was always the gun kid. Well, it makes sense. My dad was the one that always drove that into me, and it's always been part of my culture, part of who I am. What I don't understand, though, is in all that, even as many differences as we had, there was always this underlying patriotism, and it still is to some degree. What's sad is seeing a lot of us realizing, maybe a little late in our life, that the cops we always looked up to, because I kind of always wanted to be one, are going to be the ones that come knocking on your door if you do something wrong, or if they think you've done something wrong. And that's a problem when we start relying on the government. That same culture I'm talking about is very self-reliant. I remember very vividly going to these games happened right after school, right before school, right? I remember people losing lunch money or not having lunch money, where other buddies kind of kicked in and made sure they were taken care of. I don't understand a lot of the stuff that goes on because my friends were a lot more of support in a lot of ways than my mother was. I remember when I got into high school, into secondary school, a guy that was in one of those rival neighborhoods actually stood up for me against a guy that was determined to beat the fat man. Now I say fat man for now. That's not self-deprecating. I know I've been a big guy. I've always been a big guy. But I'm down 78 pounds from where I was, and I'm exactly 4 pounds off now from where I was in high school when I graduated, and I'm 45 years old. So I'm grinding away on this the same time I do get ready to set up for my future. And yes, I'm hoping to build an empire for a business. I think everybody who's ambitious when it comes to business does that. But there's some anchor in reality too. I know that it's going to be a hard 1 to 2 years because any business is hard to break in when you do that. I just think I have the family, the support structure, and most importantly, my friends lately that are going to be the ones that help me when I need it, because they have for the 60 some odd days I've been unemployed. I've magically had work appear. IT work. I've also had magically started learning new skills like eBaying stuff. Now I'm a technical guy. That shouldn't be a big stretch. But understand the technical type of guy I am. I'm the network guy. I don't use applications. I help design platforms that applications can work from at infinitum. So trying to use applications, I've never been other than a person that used all day or someone that used them only passing. That's where the stumble I had just down in my head was how to put that. Is different for me. I've seen a lot of people do amazing, cool things. My friends from back in the Gap, when all the first Ferguson riots happened And there was a little bit of that kind of trickling into my small town. One of my good Patriot friends was checking him out, and the first thing he said was, "Hey, these are kids. Just let them be kids for a little bit. Let's not egg them on." And I understand the passive attitude for a lot of things, especially from law enforcement sometimes, because our society will correct it in northwest New Mexico, or we try to. What's sad is that our society is getting drowned out by this woke crap, especially when it comes to 2A. I don't know of any other right that is more demonized other than free speech is getting that way now. And I don't understand it, because what happened to people learning about their rights? What happened to people accepting those rights and self-ownership, and to say, you know what, this is on me sometimes. I need to be the one that stands up. I need to be the one that does some stuff. And I'll be damned if I'm going to sit there and let somebody else do it. You know, I mentioned these were all guys in this little football clique. Let's be honest, man. None of us, as hard as we were hitting, expected girls to come play the game. Now, I will admit that I myself probably showed off more than I tried anywhere else, because it was one place I did okay at. But that came with a lot of learning from my friends. You know, I didn't know that you couldn't necessarily run the whole field if you were a down lineman until I started doing this. This sparked me watching football. My dad was always a football fan, but I wasn't. And that's what started me thinking about this stuff. Is like, where do you begin in your life, and where do you go, and how do you get there? I mean, that group of friends has scattered to the wind, and we're all over the place. But we're all grinding, and we're all making it. I think it's awesome, you know. Especially considering some of them were actually supposed to be letdowns according to the school system. Now they're business owners and very upright people compared to what they were thought of at the time. These are some of the best people I've ever met, and it continues to this day. And those bonds back then still reflect now. You know, as I watch the 2A get shattered and shredded, that's what gives me hope, is to know that there's enough people that are going to say, no, not going to do it. Simply put, no. And if you want to come do it, and you want to come get them, well, you're going to make me an example, and then the rest of us will finally wake up. So as I watch the roundhouse in New Mexico grind away to make the sausage and know that they're hard and heavy about guns, it makes me a little nervous, because I've always been more of a law-abiding person than I wanted to be, I guess. I say wanted to be. It was pounded in me to be a law-abiding person. But maybe the law has not always been on our side. And it took a long time, and COVID brought in a lot of this with me to realize how status I was. I was one of those people that would have backed the blue no matter what. And then seeing blue guys, the guys in the law enforcement agencies, kowtow and bow down to our, midget governor is the best way I could put it. What I want to say, I'm just going to say it, evil bitch. The lady did a lot of bad things to us. She continues to do it. And she continues to try to blame us, the New Mexican citizens, of being the bad guy. We didn't start the crime problem. You did. Some of us, and I say some of us, I was one of the people, I've talked about this. This was on the bail ballot reform. And the way they worded it was stupid, to where I could see other people go ahead and vote for it. That's probably what happened. But an uneducated voter is just as deadly as a gun in an untrained hand. And we're seeing that repercussion, and we're seeing it consistently in New Mexico. You kind of laugh at all those people, and myself included, who have college degrees, now thinking they're higher than anyone else in their logic. Because if anything, nowadays it's a sign of being a total conformist and a statist, and you've screwed yourself and the American people by becoming a college graduate. While I maintain my patriotism for only getting a 2-year associate's degree, can you imagine the abuse that someone and how much of themselves they lost in a 4 or a 6 year or an 8 year or even a 12-year doctoral program? And they're quote-unquote educated, but when they actually think about how to, prosecute a business, to carry it out, or look at the news and media and discern for themselves what's real and what's not, they kind of fall into one camp, the media's side. And if we've learned anything, the media is the bad guy nowadays. So I welcome my friends who have found my podcast. I'm actually surprised it took you that long, only because, well, you guys usually check out on me from time to time, but at the same time, we're all doing our own thing, and this is new to me, and as much as I hope this gets to have a bigger audience and have a wider appeal, it's my way of fighting back for the 2A. And trying to keep New Mexico as tactical as I can, and my country as tactical as I can. Because as ANCAP as I have become, I realize that all our freedoms are predicated on the ability for us to defend ourselves. Whether it's from the bad dude coming to try to stop you from existing, or it's the government trying to tell you you can't exist and you're not essential. That's the key point. There's going to come a time, I believe firmly now, more than ever, the government's going to get more dangerous because they're going to realize how little they actually matter to the normal person. We continue to grind and continue to do things. If anything, the government's a hurdle to all of our ambitions and where we're going. Either they charge us more taxes than they should, because all taxation is theft, in my opinion. Or they try to backdoor us and screw us by telling kids things that we know are abjectly false. And I can say that happens because I worked for a K-12, an entire district, and I had 430 staff members I had to see at one point in my time there, and I had a very good understanding of what type of stuff they were putting in their classroom, just based off of their web traffic. Because yes, I had to monitor that too, because that's part of E-rate stuff. So being a huge fan of the K-12s and elementaries and knowing that I graduated from high school, it was hard to turn my back on them. But after seeing more and more things in the media, how many times can you watch a teacher try to push an ideology down a kid's throat when all they wanted to learn was how to do math or the actual history of the United States and what their rights were? How many times have you seen someone groom a kid in schools just so that you find out later that they basically did bad things to the kid and the kid wasn't aware of what the hell was going on because they were groomed? How many times does a kid have to get beat up in our schools? How many times does a kid have to be bullied by the teacher or administration for having different values or different ways of thinking? It's hard to see that the mission you served for so long has been corrupted so thoroughly. But maybe, just maybe, my friends from back on the Gap and my newfound friends can make some leeways in before it's too late. Like, share, subscribe, rumble, comment. Tell me what you want to see on the cast. Be great.